All right, so I only have one item for all of you at the top. As I think all of you saw this morning, or many of you saw, this morning the President opened the Summit for Democracy and announced the Presidential Initiative for Democratic Renewal, a landmark set of policy and foreign assistance initiatives to defend and bolster democracy, human rights, and the fight against corruption. The initiative represents a significant targeted expansion of U.S. government efforts to defend, sustain, and grow democratic resilience with like-minded governmental and non-governmental partners. In the coming year, the United States is planning to provide up to $424.4 million toward the initiative. And these efforts will center on 5 areas of work crucial to the functioning of transparent, accountable governance, including supporting free and independent media, fighting corruption, bolstering democratic reformers, advancing technology for democracy, defending free and fair elections and political processes. I know we'll also have a call this afternoon, I'm not sure exactly the timing, to give you more information on the deliverables from this as well. Colleen, why don't you kick us off or continue our journey here together?
Thank you. Do you have an update for us on the president's call with Zelensky? And another one just sort of related, there were a couple of reports last night about a potential financial threat or potential military action to Iran in regards to the faltering nuclear talks. I wondered if you had a comment or update on that.
Sure. Let me start with the first. When I came out here, the president was still on the call, so our plan was to provide a written readout to all of you, which you should be getting as soon as it's complete or following the briefing whenever it's ready. But I will highlight for you that the president's intention going into this call was to provide an update for President Zelensky on his call with President Putin and underscore our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as Secretary Blinken did when he spoke with President Zelensky earlier this week. So this is a follow-on to that call. President Biden is also intending to discuss his deep concerns with Russia's buildup on Ukraine's borders and his commitment to respond with strong measures in the event of a Russian military escalation. We've engaged closely with the Ukrainians throughout this process at a range of levels and have been in daily contact with senior officials in the Ukrainian government. So clearly that is a component of it. I'd also note, I think as many of you saw, that President also provided an update to the B9 Eastern Flank countries with a personal readout of his call with President Putin to hear their perspectives on the current security situation and underscore our commitment to transatlantic security and to our NATO allies, with our NATO allies is sacred, and also to continue to stay in close coordination. But we will get you a readout as soon as that is complete. On the Iran question that you also posed second, I do have an update for you. As we've said many times from this podium and elsewhere in the government, President Biden is committed to ensuring Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon and believes diplomacy in coordination with allies and regional partners is the best path to achieve that goal. We believe a diplomatic resolution offers the best path to avoiding a nuclear crisis. However, given the ongoing advances in Iran's nuclear program, the president has asked his team to be prepared in the event that diplomacy fails, and we must turn to other options, and that requires preparations. We have made clear to Iran that the only path out of sanctions is through nuclear compliance. We have kept all the sanctions that we inherited in place, and we have consistently enforced sanctions, all while also presenting the clear path of their removal. If diplomacy cannot get on track soon, and if Iran's nuclear program continues to accelerate, then we will have no choice but to take additional measures to further restrict Iran's revenue-producing sectors. While I'm not going to get into additional specifics on that front, I can provide you a little update on some of the coordination that we're doing on the international front. A senior Treasury official will lead a Treasury state delegation to the UAE next week to talk about sanctions compliance. The delegation, which will be led by OFAC Director Andrea Gacki, will focus on engagements with the private sector and key UAE government officials to discuss our understanding of the companies and financial institutions that facilitate non-compliant Iranian commerce that runs through or touches the UAE. This trip follows a range of conversations that our National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and Brett McGurk had in October, that obviously Rob Malley and Brett McGurk had in November, and Deputy Treasury Secretary Adeyemo also had in November. And this is part of our extended outreach to our partners around the world to ensure that we are preparing for a range of contingencies.
Do you have a timeline on, how long the diplomacy is going to continue before, to resort to other actions?
I'm not going to present a deadline today, but what I can tell you is that we have presented a diplomatic path forward. That path is still open, but based on the outcome of the last round of talks and the ongoing advancements in Iran's nuclear facilities, we are laying the path for the groundwork for another path entirely. So it's just meant to be preparations.
Jen, the president said he hoped to announce by tomorrow meetings between Russia and NATO allies about Russia's concerns. Do you have any update on that meeting and who may be attending?
I think what the president was referring to is a range of discussions and engagements that we're continuing to have today. The B9 as an example of that. Obviously, there are a number of NATO partners involved there. And of course, we will, while I have nothing to preview at this point, two presidents tasked their teams to follow up, and we expect that to continue as well. So it was not meant to be an indication of a deal cut, concessions made, any formal format or anything along those lines, more about the commitment to ongoing engagement.
And you said you don't know what Vladimir Putin's next move is here. It's not clear yet whether he's made up his mind whether or not to invade Ukraine. But just how the Russian president said the situation in southeast Ukraine resembles genocide. That was how he described it. Is that something that you would view as a rhetorical escalation?
Well, the Russians are known for their rhetorical escalations, as they are also known for their ways of providing misinformation around the world and within Eastern flank countries. So I think we have to take their own efforts to communicate to their public with a grain of salt. What we know is that the aggression here is on the Russian side. The military buildup is on the Russian side. There's a path, a diplomatic path forward. The part of the president's objective, our president's objective in having the call was to convey that clearly. That certainly is our preference, but also to convey clearly that there would be consequences, they would be significant and severe, and we're going to coordinate with our European partners on that. So I would, unfortunately, as I've said before, not a spokesperson for the Kremlin, and I would take their words with a little bit of a grain of salt. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Just a quick question on Ukraine's ask to become a member of the NATO alliance. I mean, they've put that out for several years. It's been out there, but really there hasn't been any decision on that. What is the United States position on that issue? I mean, does the president generally support the enlargement of NATO, or does he want the alliance to add new members? What is his position?
Well, and indeed, the president has spoken to this in the past, and obviously there are requirements that any country, which the president certainly supports, any country aspiring to join security alliances, NATO and others as well, and he certainly supports the aspiration of Ukraine. There are certain requirements that they would need to meet on a range of issues, including corruption and other topics, and it's obviously up to NATO partner countries and NATO, the alliance, to determine what the path forward looks like.
As the sort of the biggest member of the alliance, largest member of the alliance, what is the U.S. telling NATO on this issue specifically? And is the president perhaps offering any assurances to President Zelensky today as he speaks to him on this issue?
No, the president's message has been clear. He certainly supports the aspiration of Ukraine, as he supports the aspiration of a range of countries, again, to join security alliances around the world. There are certain requirements that need to be met. Those are well known, and the United States, as a member of NATO, supports that path.
Okay. Sorry, a quick question on the Senate passage of the Republican bill yesterday to overturn President Biden's vaccine mandate for private employers. Are you concerned, that given sort of the Democratic support that a bill actually was able to get, are you concerned that it perhaps will actually be able to, interest some centrist House Democrats to maybe join in and secure a vote on that? I understand the White House has said that, you will veto the resolution if it lands on the president's desk.
Well, I think what's most important for people to know out there and to understand is the reason why the president proposed these requirements, which include not just a vaccine requirement, but also a testing option, testing once a week, which we feel, and I think the American people feel, is quite reasonable in order to keep workplaces safe, keep schools safe, keep stores safe where people are out there Christmas shopping and holiday shopping safe. We also know that it's steps that economists support, it's steps that 60% of businesses have already put in place. So again, we're hopeful that this doesn't come to the president's desk. I can't make a prediction of that. I'd leave that to the vote counters or the whip counters in the House. But if it comes to his desk, he will veto it. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Apart from whatever President Zelensky might have asked the president for today, can you clarify what Ukraine has formally requested of the U.S. as they prepare for any potential invasion? Have they requested support for air and naval defense or electronic warfare, as an example?
Well, we're not going to get into specifics of private requests made through diplomatic and defense channels from the Ukrainian government. If they want to speak to that, they certainly can speak to that. I would note that there have been requests made over the course of time, and the United States has provided over the course of some time now, I guess, $400 billion, I believe this is correct, $400 million, sorry, billion would be a lot, $400 million in security assistance that we've committed to Ukraine this year as a part of our efforts to support their sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that includes $60 million of security assistance that we announced during the president's visit in September, which we're still providing, we're still delivering to the Ukrainians. So in terms of their specific requests, what they want to convey privately, if they want to convey that publicly, that is certainly their prerogative, but we would not do that on their behalf.
And the head of Ukraine's military intelligence service is quoted in the New York Times saying there are not sufficient military resources for repelling a full-scale attack by Russia if it begins without the support of Western forces. Has Ukraine expressed a similar sentiment to the administration, and do you have a response?
Again, I'm not going to get into private diplomatic conversations, but I will convey to you, and what the president would convey, has conveyed, I'm sure is conveying directly to President Zelensky. Our objective is to make clear the significant and severe economic consequences if Russia were to invade Ukraine, not just from us, but from the global community. Obviously, it's up to President Putin to decide how he's going to respond to that, what steps he may or may not take as it relates to that. But I think what the public should see clearly, whether it's the Ukrainian public or the global public, is that the United States is standing up for what we believe are democratic values, for the territorial the sovereignty of Ukraine, and our objective is to prevent that from happening.
Go ahead. Quick one on vaccines. Based on conversations Pfizer has had with the administration, should Americans be mentally preparing for a fourth shot?
I would point you really to what the CDC and our health and medical experts have conveyed, and they will continue to evaluate and assess what is needed for the American people and to keep people safe. But I don't want to get ahead of their reviews of data. Go ahead, Jackie.
Thanks, Jen. On vaccines, Amtrak, which we know is near and dear to the president's heart, announced that they will potentially have to cut some long-distance routes because they don't have enough employees to operate when the federal mandate takes effect. And that's despite them reporting on the Hill today that 94% of their employees are vaccinated overall. Amtrak got $66 billion from the infrastructure deal. Now they're talking about having to make cuts. Is this policy undermining the president's own legislation?
Well, first I would say, and you touched on this, Jackie, but it's great news that 94% of Amtrak's workforce is vaccinated. That is an enormous percentage of their workforce, to state the obvious. They also still have about a month before the deadline for federal contractors on January 4th, or at least a couple of weeks, 4 weeks approximately. What we have conveyed to employers is that post-deadline, we expect employers will follow their standard HR process. That means for employees not in compliance, they'll go through education, counseling, accommodations, and enforcement. That would be what the process would be to play out. But of course, these requirements, we don't expect these requirements will cause disruptions to services that people depend on. There's some time to implement it. We're, of course, working with all federal contractors and federal employees and parts of the federal government to implement this moving forward.
And then on Ukraine, there are some reports that the U.S. is pressuring Ukraine to cede land to Russia as a way to deter them from invading. Is that true?
No, that's absolutely false.
Jen?
Well, go ahead.
Jen, thank you. Staying on Ukraine, Russian troops are still amassed along the border. Do you have any indication at this point that the president's strategy is working?
Well, Kristen, I think it's going to be up to President Putin to make a decision about whether he is going to invade Ukraine and send a message to the global community that he does not respect the territorial integrity of a country, when the United States, our European partners, are sending a clear message that there will be significant economic consequences, severe economic consequences, beyond, as Jake Sullivan said the other day, what we have seen in 2014. So at this point, obviously, you would know if they have made the decision to invade. They have not. But again, it's the ball is in his court.
And we know that Ukraine, some lawmakers on Capitol Hill have said that they want more military equipment now. I know we don't have a readout yet of the call, but are there any discussions about potentially sending that equipment now and not waiting until there's further invasion?
Well, there is equipment that we're continuing to provide. That is a follow-up from the President Zelensky's meeting with President Biden back in September. So that is something they're continuing to receive. And of course, there are a range of options under consideration, but nothing I can preview at this point in time.
More. They're basically saying, yes, that is the case, but given this current situation, they actually want it.
Absolutely. I understand that, and they've conveyed that publicly. I don't have anything to preview at this point, but certainly we have been a strong supporter of not only the sovereignty of Ukraine, but also through security assistance, and the president has a long record of that.
If I could do one just domestically on the child tax credit, and really just following up on the question that April was asking.
Yeah.
Are there any discussions about potentially pulling that piece out of Build Back Better and passing it unilaterally as a standalone bill if Build Back Better doesn't pass by Christmas, so that there isn't a lapse?
Well, I think April, I don't know where she went. Okay, there she is. I was pointing to her in the ether there. April raised an important point here, which is that December 15th would be the last child check from the child tax credit because it would expire January 1st. One of the reasons that we have been pressing for the passing of the Build Back Better is because there are key components of this package that would lower costs for American families early next year. So when we talk about inflation and we talk about costs and how they're impacting families' budgets, that's why we, Leader Schumer and others, have been pressing so hard to move this forward. In terms of the mechanics of legislative vehicles, I'd really point you to the Senate on that. But again, that is a timeline, and that is something that we are well aware of. And to go back to, I can't remember who asked the question before, maybe April, maybe Jackie, I'm not sure. It is true that in part because of the child tax credit, we cut child poverty in half. I'm not an economist. I can check and see if there's more predictions of what the impact of the lack of existence of that would be, but that sends a clear message about the impact that has had on low-income families, on families who are struggling to put food on the table, and it's been a pivotal contributor to our success in doing that. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kash.
thanks. I just want to circle back to the president's comments yesterday about NATO allies. He said that he hoped by Friday he would, quote, be able to announce meetings at a higher level, not just with us, but with at least 4 of our major NATO allies and Russia to discuss the future of Russia's concerns relative to NATO writ large. Are these meetings, conversations not happening? And if not, what was he talking about exactly?
Well, he has a call with the B9 this afternoon. That's something that includes a number of NATO allies. And of course, we are in touch every single day with a number of NATO allies and partners. And as I noted a little bit earlier, when he had the conversation with President Putin, they discussed and agreed to have their teams follow up in ongoing discussions and engagements. In terms of any other format or forum, there is no current mechanism for that. But right now, our focus is on engaging with the Europeans, many of our NATO allies doing that at a very high level, as the president referenced, and also following up, as was discussed in his call with President Putin.
Expect some kind of announcement tomorrow about some sort of conversation with the sort of entities he's talking about accommodations.
Not one that I have to predict at this point in time. Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead.
The president today spoke about global press freedom during the summit.
Yeah.
Just wondering if he's going to commit to holding a year-end press conference.
Well, one, I would say that global press freedom is something that he feels is important to stand up for, not just here, but when he is traveling around the world and ensuring that your colleagues around the world who are dealing with circumstances where they are put in jail, they don't have access to any officials, they are restricted from covering global events, human rights abuses around the world. Not that what you don't all do isn't very challenging. I'm not suggesting that, but there are a lot of circumstances around the world that I think even go beyond. I would say the president answers questions multiple times a week. I think he's done it already several times this week. I don't have a formal press conference with embroidered cushions to predict for you at this point in time, but I can assure you that he will take your questions many, many times before the end of the year, and he looks forward absolutely to doing that. Go ahead, Josh.
Can I just ask quickly on Iran?
Yeah.
You spoke to measures you're preparing. Are there particular sectors that these sanctions would be aimed at, or can you give us any more detail about what options are on the table?
Sure, certainly understand your question, Josh. I think part of the effort of our OFAC director and going to the UAE to have these discussions is to have these discussions at that level about the range of sectors and options, but I don't have anything else to preview at this point in time.
Concerned that existing restrictions are being violated with regards to this trip, like people are finding a way around existing.
We're talking about, we have kept the sanctions in place. We're talking about additional steps should they be needed. Obviously, a diplomatic path forward and having a constructive dialogue through the P5+1 format is our objective, but we're preparing a range of options in addition to what we have in place.
Did any of the P5+1 other than on these measures?
That's part of our discussions, and this is part of our OFAC director's trip is building on conversations that Brett McGurk, that Jake Sullivan, and others have been having in Europe as well. Go ahead.
Just a quick question on, just real quick question on the Democracy Summit. You
Sure.
mentioned the $424 million.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense how much of that is already appropriated versus how much would need to be approved from Congress?
Let me check, Scott. It's a really good question. I don't have that in front of me, but I will check for you, and I'll get that around to all of you after the briefing. Go ahead, Ashley.
Two very quick questions on Ukraine. One, why did President Biden immediately call top U.S. allies right after speaking with President Putin and waited 2 days to call President Zelensky?
He was traveling yesterday, I think, as you all know, and he was looking forward to having a good, lengthy call with President Zelensky today, which I expect he will do. I would note that we also followed up with Ukrainian counterparts at a lower level than the president, so it was just a matter of scheduling and getting it all on the books.
The president also said that combat troops on the ground in Ukraine are currently off the table. Can you give us a sense of what would change that calculation when they would be back on the table?
That's not currently part of our discussion or part of our policy calculations, so I don't have anything to predict on that front.
Can I ask you
Go ahead, Dylan.
Thank you.
On Afghanistan, there's in recent days some parolees or people seeking parole have started to be denied who are looking to flee from Afghanistan. I understand this system has been flooded with, I think, roughly 30,000 applications, but some of the lawyers for those parolees or applicants have said that the documentation requirement, including specifying an address or a specific threat, given that it might have been 10 years ago or their home might have been destroyed, is a pretty high standard. Is the president currently satisfied with this system of humanitarian parole, or is there any thought of lobbying Congress for another special parole program?
Well, here's what we're doing. I know you didn't exactly ask me this, and you followed this closely, but for others, through Operation Allies Welcome, we're proud to have welcomed more than 74,000 Afghans to the United States and have received funding from Congress to accept up to 95,000 through Operation Allies Welcome through the current fiscal year. So obviously what we're doing now is continuing to process through a vetting process and there are requirements of that, of course, as there should be. That's in addition to Afghans who are admitted through the U.S. Refugee Admission Program and other pathways. You touched on this, Zolan, a little bit, but the infrastructure to support refugee resettlement was decimated by the prior administration. We've been working hard to rebuild that capacity. I would say the success we've had to date of welcoming that number of people is a reflection of the fact that we've made some progress in that regard. And right now, DHS is processing applications for Afghan nationals located outside of the United States who are seeking humanitarian parole based on urgent humanitarian need or significant public benefit reason. There are going to be requirements, of course, through any of these systems, as there should be. As we consider welcoming people back in, we're continuing to put in more resources so that we can process more people and continuing to try to do everything we can do everything we can, I should say, to handle the surge in interest and in cases. But there will be people who don't meet the requirements who aren't going to be able to come to the United States. And we just want to be very clear and transparent about that as well.
With the Democracy Summit, again, at a CNN town hall, the president was asked about voting rights, police reform. He said that he had been so focused on Build Back Better and infrastructure, but that he was going to move on to that, indicated he would move on to that. Now that we are moving, you've had some progress with that legislation. Is there any update towards whether he would be more open to a filibuster carve-out, or just what exactly is he doing when it comes to those two legislative measures, given the summit going on?
Sure. Well, one, I would say, as you heard the president say, having a summit like this is an opportunity to discuss how we can all improve our democracies, protect democracy around the world, and do that in coordination with not just leaders, but civil society actors, private sector, et cetera. That's the purpose of this summit. There are dozens of White House staff working every single day on voting rights and this priority. It's fundamental to upholding the rule of law. You've heard the president talk about this many times since he took office. He signed a historic executive order in March. We've worked to double the voting rights staff in the Civil Rights Division. He's appointed the vice president at her request to lead this effort. There are discussions, as you know, in Congress among a range of leaders about how to continue to move this forward, and we are eager, active participants of those discussions. I don't have anything more in terms of views or his steps on the legislative process at this point. Don't have any updates today. Okay, I gotta wrap in a second. Let me go to AFP. Go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Thank you. One on Russia, well, one on Ukraine, and one on China, if I may. Could you tell us a bit more about how President Biden views Putin's central argument, which seems to boil down to they don't want Ukraine, A, to enter NATO, but B, also not to have any US offensive weapons or NATO offensive weapons in Ukraine. So when President Biden referred to looking for accommodations, was he talking about cutting some sort of deal with Putin about we won't do this if you don't do that?
Let me be very clear. President Biden told President Putin in their call that one nation can't force another nation to change its border. One nation cannot tell another to change its politics, and nations can't tell others who they can work with. We've consistently expressed support for the principle that every country has the sovereign right to make its own decisions with respect to its security. That is written into the underlying principle of the alliance, and that remains U.S. policy today and will remain U.S. policy in the future. As you know, NATO is a defensive alliance, and they don't have aggressive intent toward Russia. They've conveyed that. Leaders of NATO have conveyed that. Every step we have taken is to put in place the protective measures needed to defend our allies. So that, just to be clear about where the president stands, that is what he conveyed directly to President Putin.
And a quick one on China, please, the Olympics at least. Would President Biden like European allies to join this diplomatic boycott initiative? Is he disappointed in the French very publicly not doing so? And just more generally, if you're going to talk about genocide in a country, which is right there in the statement, is playing sports at all a kind of a reasonable thing to be doing? Why stop at a diplomatic boycott? Thank you.
Well, first I would say this is the decision we made, the United States made. The United States has been a leader in holding China accountable as it relates to human rights abuses, what we've seen in Xinjiang, which again the president and we have referred to as a genocide, and we have taken steps at the global level to lead this effort to put accountability measures in place. As it relates to the Olympics, we made a decision, the president made a decision, that we cannot continue with business as usual, that not sending a diplomatic delegation was making that clear, not just to China, but to the global community. There are others who have followed that same pattern and have taken that step as well. We leave it to other countries to make their own decision. I'm not going to express support, disappointment, or anything like that from here. They will make their own decision. And I will also just paraphrase, and I wish I had the quote in front of me, Senator Romney, where he said, and his quote was better than this, so I'm paraphrasing it here, but that we cannot leave global diplomacy on the shoulders of athletes who have been training their whole lives to compete in the Olympics. If you look back at 1980, and there was a boycott, all of those people who trained for the Olympics it was left on their shoulders. Young athletes who have been training their whole lives. We are sending a very clear message about our view on human rights, but we made the decision not to leave that on the shoulders of athletes. Let me just go to Raquel, and then we got to wrap up. Raquel, go ahead. Raquel, can we let Raquel? Simon, I'm trying to answer your question, and then I'm going to go to Raquel. Okay? Let me. Can I say one thing, Raquel, and then I'll go to you? Simon, we're evaluating every single day. We don't want these to be permanent measures, and it is something that the president is getting updates from his COVID team every single day on.
So my question is, the Omicron variant is now in 57 countries. The WHO issued a statement today and said that Africa has 46% of the nearly 1,000 cases globally, but almost 70 countries in the world have imposed travel ban on only black African nations. And the US is among the countries that have imposed sanctions on only 8 African nations when the variant is in 57 countries. Why don't you just lift it or impose sanctions on all the countries that have it? What will you say to those who believe that this is a racist ban that targets only African and black African nations?
Simon, I would convey to you that is absolutely not the intention. That is not our policy. This was a recommendation of the health and medical experts because there were a large number of cases in South Africa, and they made a decision early on out of an abundance of caution and to protect the American people to slow the spread of the variant. This is not meant to be permanent. It's not meant to be a punishment. And we are evaluating every single day decisions on when to lift these restrictions. Go ahead, Raquel.
Thank you so much, Jen. Since
Go ahead, Raquel.
Democracy Day here today in the White House, what is the White House assessment so far from what you guys are hearing or from world leaders and the commitments they're making? And also, what commitments would President Biden like to see from Brazil and other countries experience right now forms of democratic backsliding? What is President Biden expecting to hear from President Bolsonaro tomorrow?
Well, I would say first that the president convened this summit in order to have a forum at a global level to discuss publicly but also privately. And he convenes a private discussion with leaders this morning to engage, listen, and speak honestly about the challenges and opportunities facing democratic governments and how democracies can deliver for their citizens. And part of this is an opportunity, as I noted in my opening, to stand up for the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, for ensuring that as a global community, we are lifting up democratic societies, we are fighting corruption, we are bolstering democratic reforms. And the United States wants to be a country that leads by example and builds and repairs from the damage done for 4 years. Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you. Have a good day.